I call to order this August 12th, 2021 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:02 p.m. A quick reminder to both members of the public, if you're planning to speak, and planning commissioners, we're all masked. It's extra important that we enunciate and speak into the microphones so people watching at home can hear us. First order of business, citizens to be heard. Do we have anyone who's here for citizens to be heard? So to be clear, this is for items that are not otherwise on the agenda tonight. If it's for the public hearing or if it's to give input, if you're a developer or a project proponent for an item that's on the agenda, this is not your time. This is just general citizens to be heard. Anybody? Yes, sir.
I don't know if it's on the agenda or not, but I was going to speak about ADUs.
Why don't you come on up?
Yeah, come on up.
And I just submitted, it says submit by 5.
Great.
My name is Thomas.
Okay, we'll fix it.
Okay. My name is Thomas Moreau. I live in the city.
Oh, I just got a voicemail from you.
Okay.
Right? Did you leave me a voicemail?
Yes.
Nora? Yeah. I just
call
haven't
me
returned
back?
it yet. No, not yet.
Okay. So I came on down.
Sounded
Great.
interesting though.
Come
So
on,
go for
come
it.
on down.
The reason why I called you, because the Moab Sun News popped up in my phone, and right at the top of the article, it was talking about the critical shortage of housing, especially affordable housing in Moab, and we've all been hearing about it for a long, long time. And right at the top of the article, it spoke of short-term plans, of feasibility and priority, and number one on the list is ADUs. And number 2 was RVs. But I want to speak to ADUs because it's something that I'm interested in. It's something I'd like to put onto my house. It would be a slab of concrete, 3 walls, a roof, and a steel entry door to keep them out of my house. And I got the money, and I don't have the time now, but I will shortly. And I'm not the only one. My buddy Matt Hoppenstead, who's now a traveling MRI specialist, he's home for 4 months now. He's got the money, he's got the time, he's interested in doing the ADU. Later down in the article, it says that there's American Rescue Plan Act funds that the city wants to use in some sort of a way to address our shortage of housing. And what I would like the Planning Commission and the Planning Director, is that your title, is to come up with incentives to the citizens of Moab to get out there and then use the Moab City communication specialist to let town know all these fees that you have because you submit plans. I believe there's money at every point in the inspection, and it might all total, can anybody tell me?
It varies, but it's a significant
Ballpark.
amount,
$1,000? $2,000?
probably.
So eliminate that
A house
for the
that's
homeowners and the people that want to build an ADU. And if you can't cover that cost with American Rescue Act funds, and that's asking too much, then stipulate, all right, we're going to let you slide through the planning process, inspection process, no fees, and then in return, you give us a year of sub-market rental for a full-time employee who works in the city or the county. You guys would have to work out those details, but it would be, maybe they'd have to, say, hey, I'm full-time, I want in on these low-rent ADUs. And then we would give you low rent for a year or two, and then we're relieved of our obligations. It's just an idea that would eliminate the roadblocks that Arroyo Crossing has and the problems with the developers that this big complex that the city had all this energy behind and just kind of hit a roadblock. I think us as citizens with these tiny little projects could move a whole lot faster if we were incentivized.
Thank you.
Am I out of time?
No, you're not out of time. Typically 2 minutes, but I think you're the only person here, so let's carry on a little longer.
Just down in the article, the second one is RVs. And I do not support permanent allowance of RVs long-term in my neighborhood. So I'd like you to know that. Jacques Hadler is my neighbor. He's on the county council. I sat down last night and told him what I was thinking about this. And I said, is this crazy, Jacques? And he goes, no, man. He goes, he's traveled to resort communities that are bigger than us. We complain and we worry about our critical shortage of housing. But he says, our problem is substantial, but it's not nearly as big as some of these other resort communities. And they're already doing this in those communities. So we're not reinventing the wheel here by incentivizing the reduction of fees, the elimination of fees for ADUs to get this moving ASAP.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Ruben, for serving
you.
on city council. My kid and Ruben went to school
Oh, it's
together.
Oh,
awesome.
excellent.
And it's so cool he's on the council.
It is cool, he's on the,
For those at home, if you're curious, Thomas is wearing a shirt that says you can't spell sausage without USA, which I just feel like should be in the public record because it's
Yeah.
our shirt.
absolutely.
Great. Any other citizens to be heard this evening? Okay. That said, we will move on to our next item, which is an action item. 3.1, which is a public hearing and possible recommendation to the City Council on ordinance number 2021-12, an ordinance amending the text of the Moab Municipal Code to add regulations for brew pubs, breweries, and distilleries by amending sections 17.06 definitions, 17.21 020 C2 commercial residential zone, 17.24 020 C3 central commercial zone, 17.27 020 C4 general commercial zone, 17.31 020 RC resort commercial zone, and 17.36 020 industrial zone. Nora?
Okay, we have talked about this a number of times in work sessions, and it was noticed before for a public hearing, but we didn't have a quorum. So we re-noticed it, and now it's back to you for public hearing. Basically, right now, our code is silent on breweries, brew pubs, distilleries, those kinds of things. And so what I wanted to do is just clarify, what we want to do in the code is just clarify that they are in fact allowed uses in various zones. Brew pubs, we have at least one of those, we needed a definition in brew pubs, so I included that in the language. Also definition of a brewery and a microbrewery, and then a definition of distillery. And then the intent is to allow brew pubs as permitted uses in the C2 commercial residential zone, the C3 central commercial zone, the C4 general commercial zone, and the RC resort commercial zone. The second thing we want to do is allow microbreweries, which are the smaller breweries, and distilleries as a permitted use in the C4 zone, and then also add breweries as a permitted use, which is a bigger brewery, more, not a microbrewery, bigger than that, in our industrial zone. So that's basically all that it does, and we have not received any public input.
Okay,
It's pretty straightforward.
great. So now, just for clarification, because they're not specifically provided for and they're a use that's differing enough from uses specifically provided before, it's implied that they're prohibited, or does that work the other way around?
It's just not clear,
Yeah.
and we have somebody in the C3 who kind of wants to go with is talking about doing a microbrewery, and we just want to make it perfectly clear that you can do it in the C3.
Cool.
Or a brew pub, actually, is what they want to do.
Great.
Yeah.
So commissioners, there's the materials in the packet. If we want to have a discussion now, we can. If we want to go ahead and have the public hearing, open that, close it, and then have a discussion, that works as well, just whatever folks might want to do. Anyone have an opinion one way or another?
I would say we should do the public hearing first and then discuss if we have any
Great. Sounds good. Okay. If folks are ready, I will open the public hearing on proposed planning resolution 06-2021, a resolution approving the creek, nope, I'm so sorry. I will open the public hearing for this item, the amendments regarding brew pubs. Hopefully I don't have to read all the code provisions again. At 6:12 PM. Is anyone here to speak during the public hearing?
On this item.
On this item, correct. Okay. I am going to close the public hearing at 6:12 PM. And open things for discussion if folks want. Otherwise, there is I believe,
The staff report,
yeah, where's the staff report for it?
I just put it up.
Ah, yes, there we go. So it's the second link under action item 3.1 in the
Yeah.
packet.
And it talks about the criteria for code amendments, which is the same for all code amendments, whether they're map amendments or text amendments. I think these are pretty straightforward, something we just want to clarify. And then there are your options.
Great.
So then,
You're
without any
being-
other discussion, I guess I would like to take action to forward a positive recommendation to the city council on ordinance 2021-12 without amendments, or,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, we have a motion, a second?
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion before we vote?
I'm just curious where the amount of gallons that they're allowed to produce, like,
It has
Is
to
that-
do with Utah state liquor laws.
oh, okay.
It's a different license for the micros and the bigger ones.
I see. I was just curious where that came
Yeah.
from.
And it's common, I looked at a bunch of different codes and tried to find definitions, and it's pretty common to split them out, in Utah anyway.
I can't think of anything else apparent, but are there other things that we'll probably have to add definitions for that just aren't in the
Sure.
code?
Always, we have.
Always.
Our definitions are really lacking in our current version. So pretty much anytime we do a code amendment, it generally includes definitions.
Perfect.
Lawyer approves. It's really annoying when there's not clear definitions in statutes.
Yeah, and we have all these uses that are defined,
Yeah.
but there are no definitions for them.
Yeah, I mean, granted, that's why my profession exists, is when there's
Right.
not definitions.
Right.
But, okay, so we have a motion and a second, and Summer walked away, but we don't need Summer because we're in person.
You're right.
Okay, we're ready to vote. I guess we will just go around. You can yay or nay or abstain for pretty much any reason, if you'd like, for the new commissioners. So, Luke?
Aye.
Becky?
Aye.
Ruben?
Aye.
Jess?
Aye.
Britton?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So the motion passes unanimously. There are new code provisions for brew pubs, breweries, and distilleries. Well, recommending to council, I guess, that there are. No, this is amending it. We don't have.
Recommending, it's recommending.
It is recommending, okay.
Yeah.
Great, sorry for my confusion.
Recommending amending.
Yeah, I know. I always get turned around of when we need to send it to council and when we don't. All right, next item on the agenda, our next public hearing, which is just a public hearing. We will not be voting tonight, correct?
Right.
Okay. A public hearing on proposed planning resolution 06-2021, which is a resolution approving the Creekside Townhomes, a 9-unit townhome site plan and preliminary plat.
Okay. This project was approved and went all the way through the planning process, including approval of the final plat. And they also gave us letters of credit for public improvements. I mean, they were ready to go.
Yeah, I remember.
But they did not ever record the plat. And
Was that?
sorry?
What year was that?
This would have been like 2019 or
2018.
2018. Wow. that's not long ago.
2018. So They have to go back through the process again because all of their approvals expired. They have 1 year to record the final plat after it's approved, and if they don't ask for extension, which they didn't, then all the approvals expired. So we have an application again for this exact same project. And it's located at 545 King Creek Boulevard. And you can see on the location map, actually where the little dot is not exactly the parcel. The parcel is actually this bigger one. And, you know, it's a fairly good sized parcel, but all this purple is considered floodway. So it's a Setback Creek. So it's definitely susceptible to flooding issues, as we saw in the last few weeks. Let me go to the,
Yeah, and they still want to do this after that?
well, we'll tell them to go out there and take a look at the property. But you can see there's a little line. Let me blow this up if I can.
I remember this,
Anyway,
yeah.
there's a little
Yep.
line right here, and that represents, I think that represents pretty much where the flood zone is. Let me go to the other picture.
We've got 100
What
years till it
exhibit
happens
is
again.
that?
Sorry?
Do you know what exhibit, number, letter
Huh.
that picture
Let me
was?
see, let me look.
Water get up behind right there?
I'm curious if it-
So this, what I'm looking at right now is the site plan, so that would be Exhibit A,
Right, I got that.
okay? And then the other one I showed was a location map, and then the final plat is what I had up before.
Yeah.
So this shows where the flood zone line is, and there are 9 townhomes, 3 over here, and then the rest over here, building 1 and building 2. If you go there right now and stand kind of, this is really the edge, the top of the bank. So it's the top of the bank, and then it's a pretty channeled stream at that point. It's pretty deep and channeled. So it's not like there's a big floodplain or anything. It's like not in the flood zone, in the flood zone, or in the floodway. So there have been concerns, especially that we have been reminded of in the past few weeks about flood and scour from rushing water. You know, we had two different kinds of floods in the last few weeks. One had to do with a lot of rain somewhere else that then came through and ended up in Pack Creek and Mill Creek. That's the one that really affected this property, along with a whole bunch of others. And so the city engineer is concerned about these footings somehow being vulnerable to rushing waters and scouring and undermining the footings. So we have been meeting with their project engineer to try to solve that. Pretty much everything else looks okay as far as he's concerned. There are certainly ways you can deal with that scouring, and so they are working together to do that. And they're also, so this is just kind of a rendering of what it could look like, general scale. There are garages, 2 floors. It's a pretty big parcel, but most of it, as I mentioned, is in the stream zone. And then this is the plat. This is from the plat that they want to record. And again, all a plat really does is it establishes the pattern of ownership. And with this one, they have individual units, which are in gray, and then all of the white is considered common area. And they each have garages, and so they meet those requirements. So we're really just waiting for them to figure out some of the technical stuff with the scouring. So what I would ask is that we go ahead and take public input, and then that you continue the public hearing till the next meeting, and hopefully by then they'll have it all worked out with the city engineer.
Great. Yeah, could have been good that it got delayed. All right, So I will open the public hearing on proposed resolution 06-2021 at 6:22 PM. Is anyone here for that public hearing? All right, great. So we do ask that you keep your comments to 2 minutes if possible. If you'd state your name before you speak, and yeah, just make sure to speak into the microphone so it's recorded well.
2 minutes won't be a problem.
All right.
Okay, we live in the
Oh,
house.
could you say your name, please?
Steve Swift.
Okay.
And this is my wife, Jerry.
Great.
And we own the property just to the west of this property, or the tail end of this property. So it's the only house or unit in the area. We have no complaints about it. We think it'd be good for the area. If they solve the scouring problem, it might even protect our home a little bit better. We're pretty high up and the floodwaters were down at the bottom of the bank and didn't do too much damage at all. So it was good, and we see this as an advantage to our place, but not that it'll make, it'll take a catastrophic flood to do any damage to our place, I think. But yeah, we're all for it. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Anyone else? Okay. I will close the public hearing at 6:23 PM. 1 comment received in person. All right. So would you like us to continue? You were saying continue the public hearing?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I
To the
take
next
that
meeting.
back. I do not want to close the public hearing.
Right,
I will move that we continue the public hearing until our next meeting so that we can receive further input if there are any changes to the development plans. Any seconds?
I'll second.
All right. Can we vote real fast? The motion on the table is to continue the public hearing on this item until our next meeting. Britton?
Sorry, what?
It's all right. So there's a motion to continue the public hearing, so we would just pick it up again to allow public input again at our next meeting.
Okay.
So we're essentially just leaving it open rather than closing it and then opening it again.
Okay, yeah.
All right, we have an aye. Jess?
Aye.
Ruben?
Yep.
I vote aye.
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 Okay, unanimously continued until our next meeting, so there will be more input available to the public on the resolution for the Creekside Townhomes. Thank you, Nora, for walking us through the procedure of that.
Nora, I think there's a typo on
probably.
that color, the shaded, the different colors, one that we received, City Monticello. I think it should say Monticello.
Oh. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, item number 5, a discussion item, 5.1 on employee and workforce housing opportunities. You know,
Okay.
just a small issue.
Yeah.
Right, Caitlin? Small issue.
Yeah, Caitlin's here and Cody's here, and they can certainly add to the discussion as we go through it. But we've been sort of brainstorming, trying to, we're all aware of the issues, and I gave you all the staff report that sort of talks about all of them. It's a bunch of background information, which I won't repeat, but I think it's good background information for you as we move forward in this effort. Many of the changes are zoning changes, and so they'll have to come to you first, and then you would make a recommendation to the city council. At this last council meeting on Tuesday, I gave them sort of a refined list, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it was right after the budget hearing where they talked about taxation. So we didn't get an awful lot of input from the council, but I think we got general agreement to move forward kind of as we are planning. What we did is Caitlin and I just kind of tried to figure, and I apologize for the format of the spreadsheet in the packet. We have to use PDF, and when you PDF Excel, it really screws it up. So I apologize for that, but It's unavoidable given the way we do it. So, this is a revised version that has all of the concerns or all of the potential policies or actions. It talks about the description for them, what target groups. So we're talking about low-income folks that qualify for tax, qualify under income restriction. We're talking about full-time employees that may make more, just barely more than that deed restriction, than that cap, and so they don't qualify for the lower cost. And I could try to make this even bigger. And then folks, one of the biggest gaps is people who, like me, like Corey, like Caitlin, that we work full-time, we make okay money, but we still can't afford to buy anything or rent anything because the prices are so inflated right now. So, Caitlin and I put this list together, and we just thought we'd throw everything against the wall and see what makes sense for us to move forward with. So some of these things are going to take a shorter period of time. Some of them are going to take longer and are more politically charged. But it's all stuff that most of it are things that are a good idea for us to evaluate anyway, and we need to do everything we can. There's nothing that's instant except for we've already had a couple work sessions on the ADUs and revising some of the setbacks, and we're going to have a public hearing on those amendments. I'm drafting those now, and those amendments will have a public hearing at your next meeting. Whether you want to take action or talk about it more is up to you, but we have to notice a public hearing so far in advance that I just went ahead and did it. So at your next meeting, we'll talk about ADUs more. And just to address some of the comments, certainly one of the barriers to affordable housing is fees. And there are many communities who waive fees for various affordable housing projects. The problem in Moab is that we have no money. We're unbelievably short-staffed. We don't, there's no cushion to work with at all in our city budget. And so it's difficult for us to waive fees because we still have to pay the bills and we still have to pay employees, which is basically what the fees go toward having somebody go out there and set the water meters, and there's still work that's being done, and the cost has to be covered somehow. So without fees, that basically means that it's in our general budget, and that has to get covered from somewhere else, basically. But it's certainly something that I think the council needs to consider and discuss. And we're also talking with ADUs about a local's deed restriction that people either have to work or have lived in Moab, and then it's not nightly rental, it has to be monthly rental. And the things we've been looking at are reduced building setback. We have some funny height requirements right now, and so we're looking at modifications to those related to the setbacks. So I indicated to the council that we had started talking about that and that we will move forward through this process with the Planning Commission, and you can make a recommendation to them. So that's pretty fast if we can all agree on what those things are. And that's in the highest priority category. And then the council direction in this column says, move forward with this and let's go. So that'll be a fairly short time frame. The other thing that we can put into place reasonably quickly is allowing RVs as temporary or emergency housing. Both Crested Butte and Ouray have adopted a temporary regulation which allows homeowners to allow their driveways to be used for RVs. And one of the ordinances, I think it's Crested Butte, allows tents in addition to that, or in place of, but allows tents in the backyard under sort of those same provisions. And there has to be cooperation, obviously, between the property owner and whoever is parked there in terms of water. And there are some regulations also in you raise policies about, you know, how frequent the dumping has to be. It is an enforcement challenge because they can't do nightly rentals. It's only for long-term rentals, and it's only so less than 30 days. So it's going to be tricky in terms of enforcement. So we have initially proposed it to be certainly this fall and probably next spring, and then we would evaluate where we are with our affordable housing, employee housing initiatives, and decide if we want to extend that or not. So it's intended to be temporary. One of the council members mentioned that maybe we should look at more long-term and something we can talk about. That will likely be a policy issue and temporary provision that may or may not come to the Planning Commission. But we certainly would bring it to you for probably just advice and input.
So the idea being that people who are already living in their vehicles, who are having to go to, right now, higher elevations because they don't have shade or a place to get water or dump their waste, would be able to be in town closer to
Right.
their jobs. And
Exactly.
closer to, yeah.
And the way the other two ordinances or other two policies work, it doesn't really address rental fees and stuff like that. And I don't know if we want to get into that or just let the market kind of do what it does. But we will talk about that more as it moves forward. Simplifying deed restrictions. Right now, deed restrictions are kind of a mystery to a lot of folks, and everybody's really scared of them. And it's not nearly as complicated as people often think. However, they are complicated, and Caitlin has been looking at ways to try to make them more simple and understandable. Usually when you do a deed restriction, you also need to have somebody monitor those deed restrictions to make sure that they stay in place, and so we need to figure out who does that. And so it's just cleaning up some of our existing language, especially in the planned affordable development section, where we talk about deed restrictions, just making it less scary and more understandable. So Caitlin's working on that, take the mystery out of the deed restrictions. So we will move forward with that also quickly.
Great.
Number 5, or which is actually number 3, but I'm going to say 5, because that's what the number says, is using ARPA funds for Walnut Lane. Now, ARPA is recovery money, and the state's getting a big chunk, and we're getting a chunk, probably around $300,000 now, and then another somewhere around there in a few months. And the feds are still trying to figure out, the feds in the state, how exactly that money could and should be spent. So there's no clarity right now on what exactly you could spend it on. We're hoping that we can spend it on, at least some of it on housing. We also have way backlogged capital improvements and infrastructure needs. So we're also hoping that some of it can go toward that, towards some matching grants that we may be able to apply for with this sort of seed money, that then we could go in and do a couple public works projects, road sections, water lines, just some of the basic infrastructure needs. We have really aging infrastructure, and especially our water lines and our sewer. Those have been in the ground for a long time, and nobody really knows what's there, and we get surprised. And so it's important for us to be able to update that major infrastructure.
A
And
sewer line surprise is the worst kind of surprise you can probably
It is.
get.
Yes, it is. And fortunately, we have a new sewer plant and everything, and that's all
Yeah.
cool. But some of the delivery systems are antiquated. So anyway, we're hoping we can do that. Code amendments to allow tiny homes and villages. This is something will take a little bit longer, but also kind of pretty high on our list. Right now, we have a planned unit development section of the code, which is okay. Nobody's taken advantage of it since I've been here, but we do have somebody who's looking at it. I think that section could be improved significantly, and it's a separate section too, but to really give incentives for different forms of development and a more clustered approach. So not everything has to be on a little lot. And these tiny homes and park homes, and the technology is really changing. The building official certainly has concerns about some of the things that are out there right now, but there are also models that are International Building Code compliant that are coming online. They're becoming more available. Right now, it's still really tough because of supply and demand. Most of the folks that are building them are backlogged, and the cost is a lot because materials have been so expensive. But we want to have a code that allows for that. So if somebody wants to come in and propose that, we can allow it. So we'll be looking at what amendments to make to what code sections, and then where in town we think this might be appropriate. Amend the planned affordable development and possibly allow it in the R2 zone, which is people are scared of. But right now, we have not had anybody but the city, but ourselves, use the planned affordable housing development process to get to an approved project. The city did with Walnut Lane. And because Caitlin is on our staff and understands all of the provisions, of the PAD, we were able to work through all of those requirements. Some things are not very attractive to folks, and parking is a big issue, and how many parking spaces are required, and that's something that we'll need to look at too. But just to really clarify the PAD and consider allowing it in the R2. Right now, it's allowed in the R3 and R4. And it was originally proposed to be in the R2, but at the last minute, the council decided not to allow it in the R2. So it's not allowed right now. I don't know if there's any appetite to allow it in the future. It basically allows more density and more flexibility of design if they're affordable and deed restricted, at least 70% of them. So we'll see what changes we can make to make it more user-friendly, and if our political climate is different now than it was. R3 density, I wrote a bunch about this in the staff report, and we have seen a lot of evidence of this. You guys haven't so much, because they are, a lot of what's happening is permitted uses just through a building permit. But what we're seeing is our R3 zone allows 20.7 units per acre, basically. So you can build, the unit, for a multifamily, you have to have 2,000 square feet of lot area per unit, which for Moab is pretty dense. I know for other places it's not, but, and the folks that are taking advantage of that density are generally townhome builders that are charging, they're luxury townhomes, they're charging a lot of money, and the market is mostly second homes. And so we're not getting, when we increase the density and increase some of the flexibility, we didn't get what we wanted, we just got more expensive condos with the property values going up. In addition, the property values are based on what you can do on a lot, right? Highest and best use. So for a long time, certainly in our commercial zones, hotels was the highest and best use. So that's all we saw for a long time in terms of commercial development. And it's kind of the same with zoning. If somebody thinks they can get 20 units per acre and charge $750,000 for them, that's what they're going to do because it's going to make them the most money. And so the property value is often based on that anticipation. So what we're looking at is trying to not necessarily decrease density, but requiring, in order to achieve that maximum density, requiring some sort of deed restriction on a certain percentage of the units. So that, yeah, you can still build them, but, you know, it's necessary to address our employee workforce housing needs in order to get full use of the density. That will be, that'll be a big discussion point and will probably take a while, but it's really important. A couple of the council members are very engaged in this and want to move forward with it. So we will be, but it may take a while. We want to involve the business community, the development community, to talk through the issues related to that and come up with the right formulas and things. But I think that's the most important thing in my mind. What we're also seeing, and I've mentioned this before, is a lot of the old funky trailer parks, especially on this side of town, you don't even know they're here unless you know they're here, because they're tucked back and may have, you know, an entrance onto one of the roads, and then all the trailers are. But people are looking at buying those, getting rid of all the trailers and building luxury townhomes, which would make our situation even worse. Not that some of those trailers are great in terms of housing, but they are certainly something and they're affordable. So we want to do something to try to eliminate that concern.
Nora, what are the hurdles for developers that want to build apartments in R3? Because I know we've sent a couple down to the planning department and they kind of fizzle out.
There really aren't. I mean, they can maximize their density right now. It's really I think the biggest issue is property values and that they're so expensive to then try to build an affordable product just doesn't pencil.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things too, though. I think it's parking and height limitations as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure parking. And we need to relook at our parking requirements.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about
I
it.
noticed that parking, at least so far, is not an item in and of itself. Is it down the list?
It's not, but it's sort of assumed. But we can add
I
it.
feel like that should be one or
Okay.
two on the list. And I know there are other planning commissioners that agree, and I think we could make a
Okay.
good, solid pitch to city council why that
Okay.
would be a single thing that would actually cross a lot of these boundaries. For
And
the specific
I mean,
needs.
there's a lot of overlap
Yeah.
too, for sure.
Possible component of that apartment's why they're not being built is when folks are coming in with an apartment, there's a management aspect to that. Whereas opposed when they're trying to build and talking about this higher and more profitable use, condominiumizing or townhome to an effect, which is not an apartment style, but a condo would be development in the same way, doesn't have that element to it. So when we're talking to developers coming in, that's often a factor that they're thinking about doing a portion of their building as an apartment or just not dealing with that management aspect at all. So I don't know if that's a huge factor, but why when people come in, we're trying to encourage that types of development, but it's just not seeming to be the most appealing to developers right now.
Yeah.
I have so many people calling me that want to build apartments in Moab, and they can't make it work. It's so
Right.
frustrating.
Yeah.
It is really, we see them, we talk to them every day.
Yeah.
I mean, every day
I mean,
somebody
they're
comes
here,
in.
it's not like all that people want to build are luxury townhomes, but it's the only thing that pencils, so we got to make it pencil
That's
for the
exactly right.
apartments.
You got it. That's exactly right. Another one that we talked about is we have had some property owners that are just kind of hanging out there waiting for overnight accommodations to come back with properties that are zone C4, which is one of the zones that all the overnight accommodations are in. And, you know, there has been some interest in allowing some of those parcels to potentially be used as short-term sort of RV park for employees. And we will be talking to some folks who have approached us. We'll be talking about that further with them. I don't know how realistic it is, but it's certainly something to pursue if folks want to do it. Allow bunk houses and dormitories in some zones. Right now, bunk houses are allowed. Dormitories are not specifically addressed, but we have sort of defined them as sort of a single-family home with a whole bunch of bedrooms. And we will see a proposal before too long that is kind of a combination. It has sort of modular units that are, rooms and then common restroom facilities, and then a central facility with kitchen and recreation opportunities and all that kind of stuff. And right now, our code is fuzzy. I mean, we think that you can do it, but we want to make sure that people are aware that that's something that fills a niche, for sure. It's not for everybody, but it does fill a niche. Enforce illegal nightly rentals in residential zones. We know that there are some nightly rentals in residential zones that have been nightly rentals for a long time, and we kind of grandfathered those in 2019, when we prohibited new overnight accommodations. Also, new overnight accommodations in residential zones are not allowed, period, new ones. But we all know that there are houses in Moab that are in residential zones that don't have business licenses, that are renting via Airbnb or VRBO or whatever. And we are not allowed by state law to use any of the websites, the property management websites like VRBO or Airbnb, to try to enforce upon them. So we're not allowed as cities and counties to actually go on those websites and see who's offering products in Moab that might be illegal. So our ability to enforce is a little tough, but there is some state legislation that I think may be coming out to modify that, to allow us a little bit more authority in trying to figure out who's out there doing these things illegally. And the reason that impacts employee housing is that many of those homes were, family homes, long-term rentals, and now they're in this other, more profitable niche.
To clarify, the city, I understand we can't use the listing services as evidence of code violation. But there's nothing to stop code enforcement from knocking on their door and saying, are you overnight renting this place, to the person that opens the door, correct?
True, and if we
Okay.
get complaints, we send Mona out, we send our enforcement officer out. We don't get a ton of those. People must be doing it smart so that the neighbors aren't too bent out of shape. But if we get a complaint, we will go out there and take a look at them. There was some discussion, even maybe using Arpa funds, or, if we had a pot of money, purchase homes and rent out bedrooms to employees. So what's happened, and you're all aware of this, is we can't hire people because they have nowhere to live. And, a lot of that, like, we offered a job to an assistant planner who was really excited, but she didn't come because she couldn't find a place to live. And if we had a house that we could put people in temporarily until, for 6 months or 8 months or 9 months or, however long it takes to get their feet on the ground and kind of find a place, that would be really helpful.
Apartments.
Sorry?
Apartments.
Well, I know, but, this would be even more temporary than that. The city also, when we develop Walnut Lane, we want to be able to perhaps use some of those as that kind of use, sort of a temporary housing use for people who are just getting here. But we need to explore more options like that. That one is tough because, again, we really don't have a good funding source for that. But
Is there anything to stop someone, say someone has multiple homes, they've lived in the community and they're moving and they're downsizing? I know this does happen sometimes. Would there be anything prohibiting the city from taking a donation of a home from someone?
No, not at all. I mean, it's,
I know nonprofits take people's old
Right.
cars, like,
Right. Yeah,
it's just,
no, it's something that if,
people may not
somebody really
realize
wanted
that's
to
an
do
option,
that,
yeah.
Yeah, we would certainly consider that. So we'll just look for those opportunities. Transportation is important because many folks don't have cars or have one car for a family. And so the more we have a transportation system, the easier it might be for apartments to develop outside the city limits in the Spanish Valley where property values are a little bit lower. But we need to provide some kind of transportation. We have had a shuttle program approved by UDOT that we'll move forward with from the hotspot funding. And so that will move forward fairly quickly, and we have committed to 3 years to take a look at how that might work. Right now, we're talking about 2 fixed route buses and then a more flexible sort of call and ride car or something like that. So you will be seeing that, but we need to really pay attention, not just to where tourists are and want to get into town, but also to serve employees so they can get to work. That'll be a challenge to find a system that meets all those needs. And money, and managing it, and again, money is an issue. Housing stipend for city employees. I didn't really expand on this. In the past, there have been situations where businesses, including the city or government, provides, and this is really for the city council's benefit, provides some kind of a, so much per month to help with rent. And I think we might be doing that with police officers now. But when I was in Park City, for example, when things got tight, the Park City Council decided to give certain kinds of employees a housing stipend, or it's just a little help with rent so that they could actually find somewhere to live. Whether we'll do that or not, I don't know. Again, we have funding issues. We talked about evaluating vacant properties and considered some zone changes, kind of earmarking them. But the city council felt that that it would be complicated and difficult to administer. And I think they're probably right at this point. We do have a map of all the vacant parcels in Moab City, which is helpful. But they said the city is not really in a position to purchase any additional property at this time, and that the administration would be difficult. Changes in another transportation option. Did I skip some?
I
Probably.
think we missed a whole section there. There's a housing mitigation and replacement.
Oh, is that what this is?
Go to the left.
Oh, that's the problem. Got it. There we go. Housing mitigation program. This really applies to the situation that I mentioned before with existing housing that may not be the greatest housing in the world, but it's affordable, like the trailer parks, and coming in and having people buy those and just scrape them. Salt Lake City does have a housing mitigation, so people have to either replace a certain type of housing, especially if it's a historic structure.
Interesting.
And, or pay into a fund. And certainly that will take a lot of research as to how far we can push that, but I think it's something we really need to consider, because I don't want to see everything just demoed and new stuff built necessarily. We can certainly work on improving what we've got, but once it's gone, it's gone. Acquisition of property, which would be great, but again, we have purchased Walnut Lane. We are working on that. We are not in a position to do another one for a while. And Caitlin can give you a little update on Walnut Lane too, when I'm kind of done going over these. Vail and Deed type program. We had some folks here from Vail last year.
Remember that, yeah.
That came and talked about creating, so when they pay people to deed restrict their house so that they can only be rented out to locals or bought by locals ongoing. And they, give out sums of money that are way up there for this kind of thing. And we, again, have no funding source right
So-
now for that kind of thing.
Can I ask a question or make a comment? So you've mentioned this funding problem numerous times.
Yeah,
And I think much like the deed restriction, I mean, we don't, as a community, have to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of resort communities that have deed-restricted housing for workforce. Can we fund that with a transfer tax?
real estate transfer taxes are not allowed in Utah. In our state, we are not what's considered a home rule state, which means that the state has to give us every little piece of authority that we have. So we can't tax ourselves without the state allowing it. Like our resources, the transient room tax and our additional sales tax for tourism communities are earmarked for certain things that can be used for affordable housing. Colorado has many, many more funding options because they are a home rule state. So individual communities can tax themselves and can do all kinds of things. We can't do it in Utah. So we're at a huge disadvantage
It's
with that.
unfortunate. It's very
Yeah,
unfortunate.
because most of the resort communities that I'm familiar with, there's a 3% transfer tax on any property.
Right? We can't do it. Park City tried. We actually adopted, we voted one in, and the state quickly took it away from us. So, no, that's not an option, which is a lot of the problem. That's why we just don't have the funding options that Colorado resorts have. And even Park City, I mean, their property values are so high, and they have a good, property tax. And so in addition to the TRT and the, sales tax and all of that, they also have this huge tax base to work from. Because second homeowners are taxed at 100% of assessed value. Full-time homeowners are 55%. So they're getting a bunch of income for people who don't live there. And that really goes a long way toward funding the municipal government. And so they have some money to do stuff. We don't. We don't have those options at this point in time. We're not rich. We have, our median income's pretty low. So.
We need to lobby our state
Oh, yeah.
legislature.
And we do every year, we really do. But we have to pick our battles, because what often happens is if something gets in front of the state legislature, sometimes they make it worse. And they make it worse for every city in Utah, because, we maybe propose something. It's happened to me in Salt Lake City. Historic preservation, we went in and wanted to tweak some things, and they changed it all up and made it almost impossible to prevent demolition of homes. So we have to pick our battles for sure. And then we talked about consider allowing 4 stories, non-starter. The council is not interested in that right now at all. That was pretty clear, except for Karen, but the rest of them are quite clear. And then kind of to coordinate some kind of program for local businesses to pay into a housing fund or contribute to Walnut Lane, or we have a couple of folks that are looking at potential projects, and their intent is to try to work with some of the business owners, and so those business owners can sort of buy in or subsidize a certain number of units. And that's probably a good thing for the private sector to do right now, and there are people who are really talking about that. We could certainly, if we had more staff, and we're so inclined, we could develop some kind of a program. But again, it's an administration issue. So,
Get a big flashing sign that comes with it to put in front of your business. It says not making things worse.
so those are the kinds of things that we talked about, and what I did, and what was in your report was a more condensed spreadsheet that just talked about the things we're actually going to talk about, move forward with, and it's a shorter list.
I know you mentioned the formatting issues are because it was a PDF. Is there any way you could share the Excel
I will,
with just with
yes,
us?
and I
for-
apologize I didn't do that. I should have
That'd be
thought of
just,
that.
it was really hard to follow
I know,
along.
it's awful. I understand.
Thank you.
So Caitlin, do you want to talk about Walnut Lane just a little bit? Just so that-
Could I ask a quick question if you have time,
Sure.
Caitlin, before we talk about Walnut Lane? For you, who's in the weeds with this every day, what are the things that really jump out to you as being real potential that you think would actually have an effect, like a good effect? Of all the things on that list, what are the things just not even in their priority, not with council, just you as a person who's really primarily faced with this on a day-to-day basis? If you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
Sure. I mean, I think that the items that are at the top of our list, I definitely agree that those are my top priorities. I think ADUs, I wouldn't put those at the very top. I think those kind of snuck to the top because you as a planning commission have already been working on them. And it seems like an easy solution, like the gentleman earlier was saying, for private citizens to be able to do that, but still getting a $100,000 construction loan for an ADU is a challenge, and having the time to do that. So my priority is obviously getting Walnut Lane to keep moving forward. But I think beyond that, deed restrictions are going to be huge, especially for just workforce housing. I think the county's HDHO showed how much demand there is for housing for locals, not just income restricted, but for households that don't qualify for income restriction programs. Let's see, what else? I think I've been hearing a lot about the demand for like van life, tiny home, RV living. I think that that's just kind of a reality of our community right now. And so whether we like to or not, I think that it's our role as a planning office to figure out how to move forward with that. Because that is an employee housing solution that a lot of businesses are using, whether that's legally or illegally on their properties or elsewhere in the community. I think those are my top ones. I think funding is a huge issue. I wish I had millions and millions of dollars to create housing funds and be able to support other businesses. But we're hearing a lot from the business community that they need pretty immediate solutions. So it's taken us some time to figure out how we can do that.
When you say deed restrictions, would this be new deed restrictions, something that's more simplified, similar to the HDHO, rather than trying to amend the pad first?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think when I think about it, like we obviously don't have the funding to create a veil and deed type program, but I have had citizens come into our office before asking about deed restrictions. I think there are a lot of people that would voluntarily put just like a primary residency deed restriction on their home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if they don't get paid for it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking is just, ways for us to create a library of, whether that's housed at the city or with the housing authority or some other organization in town, a way for someone to come in voluntarily, just like record that in the, sign it.
Not necessarily income restrictions, but
Yeah.
local employee restrictions.
I mean, I honestly think that, the county is kind of the metric for that, but, and what we're seeing, and the thing that's really messing with our market is the non-primary residency market. And so that seems to be something that if that was even just that would make a huge difference.
And
I
I'm sure
think.
there are people who would want to do it, who would volunteer to do it. Probably not huge numbers, but, if we get 5, it's 5 more than we had
It's a
before.
component. I'll be honest, my partner and I have talked about moving in together, and we both own homes, and neither of us would sell our homes at this point because both of us are concerned that it would just become someone's second home. So if there was a way it might actually free up more houses for people who are sitting on it, so that doesn't happen. But meanwhile, there's no houses for sale, so that'd be, I don't know what the rule against perpetuities says about that kind of deed restriction, or what kind of limitations there would be. But obviously, if the city attorney clears it, then I don't know how that works when they don't get something out of it.
Well, and, yeah, I mean, certainly we'd have to come up with those terms.
An individual can deed restrict their property
Sure.
however they want.
They can.
I mean, you don't really, the city doesn't really need to be involved other than maybe a call to action. Hey, challenge to the community. Who's
And-
willing to do this?
And give people tools so they know,
Yeah.
as to how to do it and what.
But
what
when,
we're talking
when you
about.
transfer ownership, there's a deed restriction transfer, though.
yes,
Okay.
it's for the
It should.
lifetime. It's
Okay.
you can make them forever.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like any other deed that's recorded on the land, and you can make them go in perpetuity, but it's the same as having a warranty deed,
Yeah.
you know?
I think it's something that's important to compare and contrast with like the county's HGHO and its success up until recently. And the PAD is the deed restriction was much more simplified
Yeah.
at the county. Not one person has applied, like you said, other than the city for the PAD.
Right.
It's too restrictive. And the other important thing to think about too is parcels in the county are huge. Parking's not an issue out there. In town, it's a huge issue. We have little tiny parcels, ginormous streets. Park the cars in the street. Get rid of the parking. If it's on a street like of, 50 feet or wider, why are we making people make parking lots? They should be building houses, in my opinion.
Well, I'm a planner, so of course I agree with that, but parking is one of those sort of politically charged issues that is not logical. I've seen councils argue over it. I mean, it's one of those things, it's just a hot button for
Yeah,
people.
well, I get it. Like, when PAD was being voted on, I was in the here listening, and the people that were upset were on, streets with probably 20 to 25-foot roads. They're imagining this cluster of people parking and it turning into a one-lane road and not being able to get around and walk safely. And I get that. That's understandable. But on parcels like, within the city limits in a lot of these R3 zones, the roads are huge. Over on 400 East, even our C5 zone, it's a huge issue over there.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
can't have enough, it's not physically possible to have enough parking to do housing projects. I'm sure you're all aware of a business project that came in recently on a property that's for sale. Where are they going to pull 8 parking spots out of a driveway that maybe has 2? Unless they rip out a yard, rip out all the trees, That sucks.
It
You
does.
gotta change the parking.
Yeah.
That's
and
what I
will
see
add
and I
that.
hear in
Yeah,
development and
and
real
I'm with
estate.
Becky. If there's like one thing I
Yeah,
could
I'll add that as
prioritize.
a separate
And I do
item.
think, Nora, and I understand because like the PAD discussion a couple years ago was not heartening about the issue of changing parking requirements code-wide. I do think there's been a sea change when people have understood better how that plays out,
Yeah.
with lots and lots of real-world examples of how that has been an impediment to things that people really want to happen. So I'm
Yep.
hoping that there's been, I would bet there have been some changed minds in the decision-maker positions to get behind that issue, especially if, like, Becky and I have talked about this sort of outside of meetings as well, where it wouldn't be that difficult to have street width triggers for
Yeah, you're
parking.
right.
If a street is between X and X amount wide, you have, 1 space required per unit or 2 spaces required per unit. If it's over that, it's 1, just flat. It's just period 1, If you're talking about housing, I don't know.
Or
You'd
none.
have-
Yeah,
Or none,
if
or
it's-
you'd have a way to figure out what the business requirement should be, if anything,
I mean, in city limits with these streets, it's like, I remember when Garage Company was trying to open, they had such a difficult time figuring out the parking, and then you're leasing parking spaces from Wells Fargo. Like, do you think people really park over there? They might,
Yeah.
but people walk and people can walk, and there's all different places to be, street parking wise. I don't think it's that crucial to have that requirement, unless it's on a dead-end street that's a narrow, narrower street.
You know,
Like,
East
get-
Center, Rose Trees,
get rid of
smaller
it.
things
Yeah.
like my street is private because it's a tiny PUD,
Yeah.
but like things like, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, or not get rid of parking, but like put the clause in there. If you're on a street front that is X amount or wider, like how wide is this, where the city's got parallel on both sides and parking down the median? That's
It's
a great,
the normal width, yeah.
like 50,
Yeah, I don't
60
know.
feet.
Well, it
So,
seems
and
too, you
10
could
horse
change
team.
some of the parking from parallel to
Yeah, we still have
nose in
lots of
and
blocks.
open up a lot more parking on some of the residential.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
big
think about
time.
in front of Moonflower, like that is chaos. People backing up, flipping around, going this way, coming out, like if there was a median parking
There will be there.
parallel, I mean, it will
Yeah.
slow people down, it will make them drive the right direction. We could do that on all these streets.
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue there is that people don't want to have to make a left turn on to Main Street, and so they do crazy U-turns.
Yeah.
to
Well, you could easily
avoid-
turn right and go around the block. I mean,
But I
there's lots
do.
of options.
I'm not
could go behind the post
justifying
office.
it, I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, me
you know,
and the
we have
post office
many
alley were
issues
tight.
with the traffic.
Yeah, pothole dodging.
Yeah, you know, I lived in the East for 7.5 years
Yeah.
in New Jersey. And my husband worked in New York in the city, and we don't have a parking problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the thing, and this is the same council that didn't want a parking structure because we didn't have a parking problem. I think this is the next logical step to say, hey, we don't have a parking problem, like, let's do this, especially when we're encouraging transit and bikeability and walkability, like, it all
Well,
sort
and
of,
when, yeah, people are living in town, they're probably gonna walk or bike, so
Yeah.
it's like, you're
Yeah.
encouraging more parking and, I don't know. I think
and Caitlin, how helpful would it be if the parking requirements were changed for Walnut Lane to the project?
It would be helpful.
Yeah,
they could probably add, Caitlin, you could probably add another story on the east side and make the project pencil out a little better, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Hopefully,
exactly.
like, because that's what stuck out to me when we talked about that. I mean, I'm in support of building housing. I'm totally in support of that. But when you see numbers and the negative that add up to millions of dollars in 5 years, like, that's alarming.
Yeah,
We have to fix it. This isn't a, like, you guys have a spreadsheet of why people aren't building in Moab by negative
right.
millions of dollars. We've got to fix it. There's people here that want to build. I see them, I talk to them all the time. And we can do it. Parking
Yeah,
is
I think
huge.
that, you know, I think those are really all good points, especially the parking discussion. I think that needs to be had really soon.
Yeah.
Could we simplify PAD? Or are you
That's the
proposing to
hope.
do a new
I would
ordinance?
rather, you know, I would rather have PAD be as a permitted use.
Yeah.
So if they meet the criteria, it doesn't have to go to planning commissioner.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
It's really intimidating for people to
I know.
apply
Yeah.
for conditional uses and come in and have all their neighbors attack them that they thought were their friends.
Yeah.
It sucks. I
And- and
mean,
we
developing is
have-
not fun.
We've streamlined a lot of that, but now we're getting feedback on the other side, like these townhomes that are going in. It's like, well, we didn't know about that, you didn't have a public hearing on it. It's like, no, it's a permitted, we did that on purpose so that people could build density without a hassle.
Well, when you
People
try
are
to
never
stop the
satisfied.
water, it's going to come out somewhere else, you know?
I know,
Like,
I understand.
it's
And we are
not
talking,
pointing it directly at you, I'm just saying.
right, I
Even though I'm
understand. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of barriers that are still there and will continue to be there, property values being really up there on the list. But we have been talking to an awful lot of people, some of whom own property probably for free and clear. And in that case, it makes more sense financially because they already own the property. So we're talking to some people, some other people who are actually looking at potential hotel sort of redevelopment, not adding units that are not overnight accommodations, leaving the existing overnight accommodations there. People are really getting creative and really want to do it, I agree.
Yeah,
But it's a tough thing to do, especially right now with building costs.
it's made it even worse.
Oh, huge. I mean, Walnut Lane, well, why don't you talk about Walnut Lane?
Yes, God, that was such a derailment. That's my fault, Caitlin.
Oh, do I have
No, it's good.
to? I think the last time I gave you guys an update on Walnut Lane. We were around, it was in May, April?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just kind of recap the last few months. So since I last provided an update, Indy Dwell, we obviously received our preliminary site plan approval from you. Thank you. And then we received building plans from Indy Dwell, who is our builder for phase 1. And around the same time, they notified us that they could not meet the performance bonding requirements laid out in our contract. In a performance bond, our performance bond clause, we had been talking with them about it for several months, and then we really needed it in place. We were at the point where they needed to start procuring materials because they had submitted building plans, and we needed the performance bond in place in order before they could start ordering materials. So we kind of got to a halt. They also indicated to us that they needed $300,000 to $400,000 additional because of how much COVID has impacted material and labor costs. Obviously, that was kind of at the peak. After they notified us, lumber did start to go back down. Steel is still up. Construction prices are still really high. So anyway, on July 1st, Lori sent them a notice to cure for those 2 items, and also because they were several months delayed on the project schedule that they sent us and weren't providing updates to when they expected that to restart. So we sent them a notice to cure that they responded on July 24th or July 29th. The period to cure expired on August 2nd, which was last Monday. And so that's kind of where we're at. So we are trying to identify whether and how we move forward with Indy Dwell.
Or if we do.
Or if we do, we're evaluating other potential opportunities to keep moving forward with phase 1. So hopefully we will be having a conversation with the city council about how they want to move forward in September. They've asked for another budget update, pro forma update on the first meeting in September. So that's where we're at.
Have you guys considered partnering with a private entity to do the development part of it?
We're certainly open to
Open to
it.
anything at this point, really.
I mean, there's so many of them here, they might be interested.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, and we have talked about, going out again for bids, and maybe it's stick-built product rather than a modular product, or, just allowing some differences in what we would consider. That's certainly an option. Maybe get some local folks and local folks are really busy too, and they can't get employees to build. So it's just a tough time, all exacerbated by COVID and material costs. So it's not moving forward as smoothly and quickly as we would have hoped. We knew it wasn't going to be easy, but it's just being delayed, which is really tough.
Mm-hmm. I have received calls from local developers that are interested in helping us pick up the pieces, though. So it's just a question of how the council wants to move forward, since it's such a large amount of money. So
Do they have any feedback on the project or things they would want to change when you talk to the developers?
Yes and no. I mean, not really. I think that we know for sure if we go in the direction of using a different builder. Our current building plan sets are for modular steel frame development, so we know that we will need to work with an architect or a designer to redraw those plans. So internally, we've talked about some like minor changes to those plans. At this point, the city's already paid a significant amount of money for final site plan documents, for civil and landscaping, utility plans. So it'd be my preference to modify our current plan so that a different builder can use them, so that we don't have to keep paying for, especially our civil engineer, to keep redesigning utility and foundation plans, and, you know, get new structural engineering done and all that stuff. So that would be my preference. So I think that that's the direction that I would like to take the project. But it seems like at this point, there's probably more interest from the council to open it up to do kind of like a design build, looking for kind of a master developer with an architect and a contractor to take our current plans and our civil plans and figure out how they can modify them. Yeah.
Moving forward, but it's tough.
It's hard. I mean, it's not just lumber, it's glass, it's
It's
doors,
everything.
it's windows, it's,
Right.
and
It's
then everything takes
metal
forever
going
to
up
get here
too.
and you're paying interest on your loan. It just
Right.
snowballs.
And
It's-
labor is really tough. People just can't find people to work to build these, physically build stuff. Because they don't have anywhere to live.
We should build houses for them.
This is like,
Chicken and the egg.
I know.
Well, it kind of is.
It
you
is,
know?
it
It
is.
is.
And some of, you know, well, we can get real philosophical about it, but change happens, and we all know that. It's kind of, we just sort of try to deal with rate of change and how we try to make it so that as we change, we don't forget about the community that's already here. And I think that's all of our goals, and it's hard to do.
September, you get contact with them again? Or what's happening in September as far as Walnut?
Well, thankfully, I'll be going on vacation next week. So I'll be getting back the day of the next city council meeting, so I won't have time between now and then to prepare all the materials that they've requested. So we'll be having that conversation with the city council at their first meeting in September, which I think is September 12th. Just the way the agenda or the council meetings are scheduled.
Yeah. What was the original plan? Was to get people in, because phase 1, 3 double homes. So that was 4. And then move
4.
everybody else from the other side, put them into there. When was that originally planned to be done? Like next May?
About now
About
was
now.
our original plan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so at this point, I think right now, the way I've started projecting what the timeline's gonna be, like if we start moving forward again in September, is we won't be building until next spring at the earliest. So, and that's just,
Yeah.
bidding takes a long time, and we'll need to take a few months to redesign the plans no matter what, if we go in a different direction. So
Oh, it's so tough.
Which
Really
phase was
tough.
first? Was it the apartment side or the twin home side? Are they duplexes or twin homes?
they're duplexes. We are doing the 4 duplexes first because that's where we have the most space on the site. And then we're going to move 8 of the families into those duplexes, and then we'll have room for that apartment building. We have talked about, you know, could we move forward with a different phase instead of these duplexes? And I think it's just not realistic to go any other route than what we've been planning for.
Because you displace people if you did that, right? Or inevitably, if you need more space, that, yeah.
Aren't there utilities all over that site though? Couldn't they just be moved to a different part of the site?
I think
'Cause
it's
it was full of trailers
Yeah.
at one point.
yeah, it is.
It just makes sense to me to like build your high density building first, because that one side, that east side, seemed like there was a lot more room for more units going up if we could fix the parking. So it might be good to wait on that side and maybe just have to redesign that one phase so it makes the project more viable.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. I think at the end of the day, we've come to the conclusion that it's not feasible. And I think if we want to add density, it'll be adding density in that third phase. Either through the 2 apartment buildings we'll be building in the third phase or adding more townhome duplex models.
And why is it not feasible? Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Partially, it's not feasible. I don't know if it'd be helpful to pull up the site plan. But we have slightly less room on the east side, partially because we have an easement with the property owner in the center. And the council kind of signaled that they wanted to be a little bit lower density on that eastern side because it buffers that R2 neighborhood on the north and the east. So we're proceeding with more like infill development, so townhomes and duplexes on those 2 northern and eastern sides. I don't have a dongle.
You don't need to pull it up,
That's unfortunate.
It is, it really is, it's very frustrating
It's
for all
a
of us.
super bummer that some of those families have to stay in their not suitable housing for the winter.
And that's the other part of it. I mean, those trailers aren't getting any better with time.
No, and through winter, it's really hard, and
And
I just
we've
really
tried.
feel for
Yeah,
everybody.
it's hard.
Ooh.
Development is hard right now.
I think the best thing we can do, though, I mean, maybe while you're waiting for all this to pan out, like focus on fixing pad. Tee it up for other people to do the same thing. They're here. They are here. They call me once a week looking for property. And they can't make it work. You know,
Yeah.
we can only do so much with people, and they're trying to keep them in a realm of reality with their property values, but there's other things that can happen too, I think, that would make a huge difference. Please. I want to see apartments built more than anyone. I lived in a cockroach infested shack when I moved back from college. There was nowhere to rent then. Nowhere. I mean, this is not a new problem in Moab. We've always not had enough houses for how many people are coming and living here.
Yeah.
It's definitely worse now, but it's not a new problem. And we got to get creative and start fixing our code. It's been the same for too long. And
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're hoping to do, and I think it'll actually be cool.
yeah, I'm
I
excited.
mean, it won't be easy. These processes won't be easy, and they'll be controversial, but this is the good stuff. This is why we do what we do.
Yeah. Is it possible to break it up into not such a big, you know, I feel like when you lump it all into one project, it becomes like pad where everybody,
Yeah.
you know, there might be like 10 good things about it, but there's 5 things that people don't like. And so then, you know, the whole thing gets thrown
Right.
aside and ruined, like
Yeah.
pad. Can we pick avenues and start with parking? Can we, you know, do we have to make it a big project? Can we simplify it into text amendments in the current code?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, we can do that.
I
We'll
think we
take a
should do
look
that.
at
Because if we, just spitballing, just thinking code-wise, if we amend our overall parking requirements, that's by zone right now, or it's by,
It's not, it's just by use.
it's just by use? So if we amend it by use in the code where it is by use and say that this supersedes all other provisions that speak of parking, we could also do that, correct? So it could automatically apply to pad developments if we do it in the underlying code.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, so that, I mean, I'm just thinking quick fixes, we wouldn't even need to touch the pad. The pads could still have whatever the pad has, but this supersedes what's in the pad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe the city's contribution to helping these developments too is creating the parking restructuring in the streets. So there's the median parking. You know, I'm thinking of like 4th East. If somebody buys something over there, develops, you know, apartments or does a business or whatever, you know, can we take some funds and, you know, create the parking that's needed on the street?
So, just so you know, we have been approved by UDOT to do For the hotspot funding, not only were we approved for the shuttle, but we were also approved to do median parking on a
Right.
whole bunch of the downtown streets.
But that's just kind of right
Yeah.
in these
that's in the-
immediate commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's something that will be moving forward.
Yeah.
So that is a step in the right direction. But there are lots of opportunities, I think you're right, with these wide streets with additional head-in parking. That's paint, it's not that hard to do,
Yeah, just paint, like,
right?
do we have to plant trees and pour curb and gutter, or can we just paint some lines?
Yeah.
Well,
Within
there's some areas of Fourth East that is currently no parking. That couldn't that be changed to ease some of the traffic and the speeding? I know all along the new apartments that went in across from the high school, that's a no parking zone, that you can't park on the street there.
I certainly haven't noticed a traffic issue with Fourth East or a parking problem.
I think
I mean,
it
I
would
live
slow
on it.
people down
I
a
live
lot.
on Fourth East,
I do
and
too.
I know the high school kids
Sure.
come and they turn around on our cul-de-sac,
Oh,
so they don't have to make a left-hand turn into the high school. So they'll zip around, they'll go out so they can turn right. But it's just, there's other lots on Fourth East that could be developed, and they squeeze all the parking back behind the units since there's no street parking.
that's certainly something we could look at.
So recently in my office, we've had a property go under contract and a guy wanted to do like a coffee shop
Now I heard about this.
downstairs,
Yeah.
and then he wants to live upstairs and rent a room to someone that lives in Moab. It's
Parking
an older
killed it.
home. 8 parking spots is what he needs based on the apartment and the square footage of the building. And it's impossible. And wouldn't that be a cool thing to be over there? Like, people could go get coffee, not on Main Street.
Yeah, I
in the
think it'd be
chaos.
cool. The concept
Those are
is
the kinds
great.
of things that are just getting blocked, and
And parking.
yeah,
We
it's
are.
just.
I can't agree with you more.
And fee in lieu is not even an option over there, which, I mean, I don't know if it would have made it work, but still.
Stupid question for me. Is there any provision for potential developers or property owners in the interim to just come and ask on a case-by-case basis for a relief of parking requirements?
The
Because
planning
didn't we do
commission-
that with the Four Corners?
The planning commission has that authority. And in fact,
Let's tell people about that, because I
Yeah.
think everyone's sitting here right
I know.
now. I don't know. I mean, we understand, we don't want it to seem like we're granting favors or doing things.
I think
for
it should
some
be by
property
use,
owners.
like
There's a
Nora said with lots of things.
criteria.
But in like an
which you-
interim, though,
Yeah.
there's
because we know
specific-
it's gonna take a while to make the code changes, in the
Yeah.
meanwhile, let's not.
there's some specific criteria right now. And for those Main Street businesses, I think most of them could meet a lot of the criteria.
Right. The C3 is one of our most forgiving zones as far as parking, so the fee in lieu, there's a couple other mechanisms, mostly oriented around the planning commission's exception, but like, for instance, with this particular property, when we met with that potential buyer, we do an evaluation and basically do a rundown of what his options might have been. Most of those are all potential, they're not by right, so it's,
Yeah.
you might get a parking station, and based on that, you might be able to do off-site parking, and based on that, you might be able to get a
Yeah.
fee
But
in
then if
lieu.
he parks a food truck, he doesn't have to have parking?
Doesn't have to have parking. He
For
has to have
that,
parking
for that
them
particular, for the customers.
Come on, this is crazy.
Right,
I know our
Right.
food truck ordinance also needs a major overhaul.
right.
There's no doubt about
I mean,
that.
if we're working towards sustainability, couldn't we offer businesses some sort of incentive if they get their customers to bike or to walk?
I don't think
And
we
not
can,
to drive, that they.
I don't think
that
we
they
can,
have them
I don't
to
think
bike
we
or
can
walking?
offer
Somewhere to
things
park.
in
I
exchange
don't think that
for.
the city can, but certainly property owners can do that, business owners if they wish. But we don't, it's hard for me, I mean, I know I keep saying this, and I know I sound like a broken record, but we just don't have money to do much. We just don't, and it's frustrating for me every single day. But I can't, we can't do it if we don't have it. We can't spend it. And we're
What do we
pretty-
need money to do that I don't understand?
Incentivize. By,
Incentivize?
how would we incentivize?
No, she was
I
saying
guess?
give them a parking variance in
Oh, if
exchange.
people
In
will walk or
exchange
bike?
to,
Yeah.
Yeah,
if
well, we
they
will. I mean, that's,
incent their customers to bike, you
yeah,
know, and they can show that this % of their customers will arrive on foot or by bike or.
right, and that's what Four Corners did, and it was approved. So there is a mechanism, but it's discretionary.
Yeah.
And when it's discretionary, then people don't necessarily, it's harder for people to move forward. 'cause
Totally,
it's-
but I mean, and it sounds like maybe you're already doing this, but I know there's things that are coming, there's things we want to change to make it a change by right.
Right,
But in the interim, can we be like, hey, please do actually try to get a variance from the planning commission, they're very passionate about this particular issue, as much as you can possibly give
Right.
someone an assurance, I mean, that might go a long way.
it's not a variance,
know.
however, because
I know,
that's
I use that
a
word
term of
incorrectly.
art. But yeah, no, I agree. And we do encourage people. We're working with a Main Street business who wants to do a pretty significant addition and, you know, and so we've given them the criteria and they certainly plan to move forward to ask for exceptions, so.
How long realistically will it take to just change the definition about parking in all of our code?
So say Becky and I approach you with proposed language, the next step would be running it through the attorney, running it through the code.
Sure, I mean, we probably talk about it in a work session, come up with
Yeah.
some language, include the attorneys with it, maybe see if city council's even, they're, you know, they may not be interested in spending time or us spending time on it. But then it can move forward relatively quickly, but I think it'll be controversial. Because again, it's not a rational thing for people. There's plenty of parking in this town. Maybe you might have to walk a block.
Well, I think if we have a work session, we have it with the council and we hash through all this, because I think once you discuss it, it becomes really obvious, like,
Yeah.
this is what needs to be done. And things need to be not overlays and conditional uses
I
and
agree.
unknowns, because like in the real estate world, people are looking at a property and they're like, okay, I want to do this, but this is an if, this is an if, this is an if.
Yeah.
The seller doesn't want to hold it off the market in order for them to apply to the city. They don't want to pay all the fees to apply. Like, it's just, and then it goes nowhere.
It happens
It
all
just,
the time.
let's make it clean, clear, and developer friendly.
And
And then
maybe
we'll
it's
get
contra-
what we need. We need housing.
Yeah, and maybe it's controversial, but honestly, at a certain point, like for a fix like that, I feel like, yeah, it's controversial, but like, you need to be on
Everybody
you need to be on the record about why you do or don't want it, and that's
I understand.
not you. I'm not saying you.
No,
but,
I
but the
understand.
decision, the council members.
The
You know,
council really
it
struggles.
can be behind the scenes, but like make people justify why they don't want to change the parking. And I'm
Right.
someone who,
The council
I
struggles.
don't take that tack very often, but
They really struggle with, the hard choices when they're hearing from a lot of people in the community. And so that takes time.
All these places where the roads are this wide, though, are pretty, like, commercial type, busy, bustly streets. It's not, it's not like it's on my Vita Drive or,
yeah.
places where people were really upset about the pad. I remember specific people and where they lived. and
Right.
That were upset about it. And I think this doesn't even go into those neighborhoods or
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah.
That
It's
makes
in the
sense.
core, it's downtown, it's where most of the R3 is, which I think we need more of, but that's another discussion, so.
For sake of argument, if we want to get down even into that line, Caitlin and I met with a pair of developers from Salt Lake that were very interested in developing apartments in the C3, I think, C3 zone. So they were talking through really what that would look like as far as the planning requirements in the process. And looking into that, evaluating, of course, we always have to be the bad guy with, well, here's the parking requirement.
Yeah.
Throwing that burn down, they actually said, well, based on our algorithms and what they do up in Salt Lake, they would have actually been proposing a higher parking count based on what they've experienced and what sells. So just to be a counter voice of, whereas the market does have some concept of where it's going to want to sell those types of units and with what amenities, However, the one thing we've continued to hear, and Becky said this, is 4 stories. That's one of the continuing commentaries of when people do their
What's our
pro
current
formas.
height limit?
It's-
30 feet.
30
is
and
that?
40, depending. 40 for
Residential is
commercial.
30, 40 commercial, and then 3 stories is, so even if you had 40 feet, it's still restricted to 3 stories
Stories.
within a separate provision.
Gosh,
I know.
That
But-
seems to be the bigger deal breaker.
yeah,
in our
I hear
buildings.
that too.
With
and parking,
apartments.
But
Right,
And-
because the parking,
Yeah.
they can accommodate, but the 4 stories is what
You know,
really throws
and-
them off.
This time of year, we're into silly season with elections, and who knows what will happen? I mean, who knows who will be sitting on the council when some of these decisions get made? But we can certainly go as far as we can with this council, and
Yeah, or get the things rolling so
Yeah,
that
we'll
the new
definitely get
council's
this stuff
first
rolling.
vote is on the parking edits.
and our linear footage is almost there. I mean, with like floor systems and ductwork, like what do you need in theory for 4 stories? Like 40?
I think you could squeeze it to like
Two?
40, 45, really including roofing, and depending on
Yeah,
what your code
45.
says, some of our code sections that is the most permissive for multi-household, which isn't in the residential zone, requires pitched roof, which all of a sudden, if you're talking apartments, really increases that building height where
It
40,
requires a
you're-
pitched roof?
it does. In this particular
have to.
section, it's not all of them, but where all of a sudden, and like we experienced with the ADUs, all of a sudden you're, just because of that pitch, significantly shrinking because of that joist structure, how
The
actually tall
mono-pitched
those.
roof qualify for a pitched roof?
I'd have to check.
What was your
So like a
question?
shed roof
The shed,
as
yeah, it
opposed to,
counts. Yeah, and it
yeah,
doesn't
that
have to be
section.
hugely pitched, but it does have
Yeah.
to have some pitch
in
to
that
it.
one, yeah.
Yeah.
Flat roofs are a nightmare here, but I don't know. It's weird that we require that. Is there a reason?
In that particular section, I think there is. There's a series of kind of very specific that came as a result of,
Specific projects. probably.
yeah, it was, yeah, they developed that after something.
Interesting. So like
But
the
things
idea of
change, so we should be-
exchanging height for deed restrictions or local occupancy or
I
something.
mean, we're doing it with
Making them on
OAs.
arterial
It's
roads.
a familiar concept, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that was brought up to the council. It seemed there were some council members that seemed to take that in and some that were staunchly
Building
shut it
height?
down. What was that?
Building height.
A building height.
Yeah, there's one person who was willing to consider it
Yeah.
at this point.
If you could get it to where these buildings, if we went up to 4 stories, it's like, okay, well, you have to build on the lot line that fronts the road to get it away from the houses, and they didn't have to have, all the parking. They could probably, it might help alleviate like it looming over the neighbor if we change some setbacks in combination with.
Yeah, and that's true. If we will allow additional height, we increase the side setback requirements. I don't know.
Well,
if
we've
that-
always
And
talked
like
about
push it to the
tiered,
street only
about
on-
tiered height too. I mean, what if one portion of the apartment complexes that these Salt Lake folks want to build could be 4 stories, but everything within X amount of feet of the lot line isn't?
Yeah.
That's possible and
It's
it
tapered
requires
down.
stepping.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that gets really into sort of a form-based design, which
Yeah.
again adds cost.
Yeah.
So we get arguments about that all the time,
But if
but
it was that or nothing,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that brings up a whole issue too of discussion of setbacks. And when you have different zones abutting one another, what setback trumps the other one? If somebody's side setback is 7 feet and somebody's backyard is 25 feet and they butt up against each other, which one trumps the other one? When you have multiple zones
Sure.
coming into contact, I think we would have to address that if we're going to go to increasing any kind of height.
Yeah, and like, for building in residential and commercial zones, like the C4 or the C3, but the C4, you have to, they're bigger setback requirements adjacent to residential uses, existing residential uses.
Screening and landscaping
Yeah.
buffers
Yeah.
included as well. But
Is-
with height, remember, we're talking about ADUs that are 20 feet tall right now, and we are already having major outcry from neighbors. So
we
as
are.
so as we're talking about increasing, keep it in scope that our community is pretty sensitive, and there's this really genuine community character that could potentially be significantly altered by some of this, especially in the R3.
Yeah, pretty much every ADU that we approve, some neighbor calls, how can you allow that? It's 20 feet, the tower's over my yard.
Yeah, and then their house is just as tall
And then
in a lot of
In
cases.
some cases, that's true.
right.
I think
Well, I
we could
mean, the
alleviate some of that.
townhomes right there are currently a permitted use by right in the R3 zone. And
Yeah.
I just feel like that is something that like, that development or something similar could tomorrow happen on every single lot in the R3
Good.
as a permitted use by right. And I just want the public and council to like keep that in perspective, that
It's already in our code.
it's already in our code and there's changes happening and there's changes inevitable that the market are driving, and we have the opportunity to control them and get something out of it for the community. And this is just me saying this for anyone listening who's not in the room and knows it already. But
Good
yeah,
discussion, everybody, I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no, this is
appreciate all
really
your
good.
input.
Speaking of that development, think about if it was pushed all the way to the road. How much further away it would be, you know, in the back.
yeah,
You know, you could alleviate a lot of that
You're right,
neighbor
Yeah.
upset.
for sure.
And maybe you just make it specific to fronting certain road widths, like the parking change requirements, so that it's not, I think the biggest fear with things like this is, you know, our R2 tucked away neighborhoods, you know, down at the end of Rose Tree or on Mayvita Drive or down, you know, on these streets where people, you know, want their view, and
Well,
they're
people-
upset about the 20-foot ADUs and.
people don't like change. I
Right.
mean, they just don't, it's human nature. And especially as quickly as Moab has changed, people are really uncomfortable.
But I guess what I'm saying is, let's not make it a blanket thing where it's scary
Right.
and everybody thinks their life's gonna get ruined. Let's put it in certain areas
Where it makes
the
most
sense and
sense.
it's not gonna
Yeah,
freak everyone out like the pad did.
Yeah, and understand that.
And I think a
That's
lot
a
of
good
things
idea.
with the pad, you know, I think if there would have been some like renderings and examples of what it would have looked like in R2, I don't think people would have been as freaked out. They were imagining like a skyscraper and like 10 cars in the middle of
Rose Tree.
Rose Tree. When really, with your parking requirements and the density, it probably would have been like a 3 or 4-plex maybe, and parking
Yeah.
off the street.
Yeah.
another thing the council told us to look at in the R2 is allowing different configurations, which is pretty easy to change. Like, right now, it's basically a single-family or a two-family home is all that's allowed. So, you know, if we also, same density overall, but if we allow a 4-plex or a triplex, then it at least gives some flexibility, and people can then subdivide and put a 4-plex on it, or,
Yeah.
you know, right now they can't. So.
Yeah, it's just dividing it into more units, not necessarily a bigger building with more cars, it's just individual.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and that's why like the early and often communication and is really important, because you know, it's whether it's human nature or not, these are valid concerns that people have, and I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we are talking to people and not saying, oh, well, you're just wrong about your fears, you know?
Yeah, there's been so much disinformation about so many things
Yeah,
recently.
yeah, there was huge confusion. I
it's
remember
really-
the pad
it's really
public hearing,
frustrating.
half the people came in and thought that we were giving a height bonus, when the underlying height in the code right now was
Right.
not changing, you know, and that was, people were like, oh. And there were a few people that it kind of assuaged the concern, so I think just
Yeah.
making sure. Yeah.
There was an element about 6 months ago that was really pretty hot topic, but it's kind of tapered off. But the concept of Mill Creek being looked at as a small area plan as far as opportunity for apartments and more density, and that
Yeah.
it's mostly R2. But essentially those property owners, if you recall, at the time of high OHV noise conversations in that corridor, we're approaching the planning commission to see what opportunities we could include in that area. So there's currently not a particular zone there other than a section of 3 zones, I think it touches. But in that particular area, if you're thinking about R2 adjustments, but also maybe a small area adjustment where you're talking about certain areas and streets. This one being particularly a more higher traveled route, but then giving a bonus to those particular properties to maybe primary occupancy housing and then you can increase your density in that section. Something like that. Just want to throw back and say, well, those voices haven't been forgotten. We still hear you. But now that we're bringing this conversation up, not to forget about that.
I think we could sit down with a map and circle some areas, come up with a simple list of just a few changes, not make it too complicated, and just.
Unfortunately, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
I mean,
The simple, or we can make it though, like maybe start with the parking and then maybe do,
Yeah,
I don't know,
parking is important. I agree with you.
height, parking.
And it's a limiting factor for commercial uses too. Salt Lake City, we had parking maximums. Like we wouldn't let apartments build more parking. They just weren't allowed to. So.
Well, it's
kind of
future,
an
it's
option
future
approach.
focused planning to have less parking be,
Yeah.
I mean, environmentally, space-wise, like, the days of the asphalt graveyard are going by the wayside for good reason, so. And honestly, I think that complies with what our current council, what their priorities are on water usage, on land, on green space, and all that kind of stuff. I think that'll be the key, is linking it to a lot of the things that they're already doing and making a priority.
Yeah, it's funny that we're resistive to lowering the parking when there are maximums for saying you can only have this many. We only need this many cars in this area.
Most urban
Ride your
areas
bike.
now have parking maximums. Most big urban areas that are progressive.
Don't be lazy. Parking's not crazy.
Moab's so small, like you can bike and walk in the city, like there's
And
not.
like I said, walk a block. It's just not that big a deal.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it sucks in the summer, but whatever. When you get there, you cool off.
You still will have, parking for disabled people and parking for people who it really is a big deal to walk. And, if anything, it'll help free up all the spots that get taken illegally by people who brought their cars because,
Oversized parking is a huge issue.
Yes, it is.
Takes up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Some of the battle to that is regional transportation, the opportunities so say you're a family and you're going to decide to have one vehicle if need be, or none, your opportunities to go to Junction or go to Salt Lake for a dentist or a doctor appointment if you're not being able to be seen in Moab, which is difficult to do. People are going to have 1 or 2 cars so that somebody could work here and take the kids to a doctor's appointment.
Yep.
So we've had that conversation as well.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope this new shuttle will actually
the
encourage
airport,
people to get out of their car.
future, rail, I don't know. I like to think rail, but maybe not so much. But the
You
airport,
got $1,500?
$75 for an airport ticket is not bad to go around, $75 there, $75 back if you drove a truck. Well,
Yeah.
you're paying that much in gas anyway.
Let's hope that $1 trillion in infrastructure will actually go to rail and other mass transit and not just roads.
Yeah, it'd be great. It's hard to make transit in a community like this sustainable financially, but not impossible.
That's a really good point, Corey. It's the car transportation isn't for in town. It's for, and that's, no, for sure.
We're on an island, and right
Yeah.
now, when you're on your island, you're fine, but it's when you have to leave.
Yep.
Yeah, like I went to Grand Junction yesterday for doctor's appointments.
Yep.
There's nobody here that can deal with my
I was just
asthma.
there today.
Yeah.
There are people offering services like that, though, to take you.
More and more.
And
Yeah.
there's a shuttle, and
And the private sector can certainly fill that gap better than they are.
Sure.
Uber.
Yeah, if anybody in Salt Lake is listening, like, come on down.
Do we have an Uber?
We've got one Uber and Lyft
We have
driver.
an
He does
Uber
both.
driver.
Oh.
Yeah,
He does both.
yeah.
That's good.
Changes the sticker.
My
I'm
car's too
surprised
old.
more people don't do that when it's busy, like,
Especially like Uber Eats and
Yeah.
all those kinds of programs
so
with
I
Uber.
would totally do Uber Eats, like when it's crazy
Yeah, I know, I
downtown.
would
Because I
too.
hate getting down there and parking and figuring out where to get in, sneak in the back door of Miguel's and do the kitchen.
All right, everybody. In terms of future projects, as I mentioned, we have a lot of people talking to us right now about apartments and multifamily, a lot of people. We have a couple little things coming up at your next meeting. What else do we have out there that's kind of big? Well, we have applications for the Atlas, which is an apartment and townhome project that Ben Bird is proposing, and that's going to be big,
Hospital.
phased. It's the old hospital building. It's that site, and they have filed an application, so we'll be working through that
That's
process.
good. I didn't know he was doing that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool thing, but,
He's steamrolling right now.
sorry?
Ben is steamrolling right now. He's got stuff moving. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we'll be seeing more and more of those, I think.
We'll likely have, the new hospital, the current hospital, is doing an expansion project. We'll likely see that site plan on the 26th.
Yep.
Just right up above it, right? Right behind the care center.
So there's two elements to it. One is a clinic that'll be up near the special service district behind the care center. And then the other is an actual extension off of the hospital.
Okay.
Didn't we see that a few years ago?
What's that?
Preliminary, the hospital plans?
There
It come
may
up.
have been an expansion that was on the other wing, and now this will be of urgent care. They're expanding that side, which they need.
And, we're really supportive of it, just with nonprofits, it takes longer for them to get everybody together on the same page. So it takes just their organization longer to respond. So it takes time. Okay?
Council and other things, but that's about it.
Great. Thanks for allowing us all to just sort of,
Absolutely. The more the merrier, the more we do that, the better. I mean,
Yeah.
it's brainstorming.
totally, and thank you all for trying everything you can think of and keeping on. Caitlin, thank you in particular, and we're so sorry that everything's going nuts right now with your project. I hope people realize it's not by fault of you all.
No.
Yeah, this feedback loop is super important, especially right now.
Yeah.
All of us
Totally.
throwing
Oh,
in
yeah.
Anything that can come in
Yeah.
and then get anything out of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
talk
that's our
about
job.
reality with people.
We don't like doing
That's
that.
important.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I got an email that was so off the wall. And so I just wrote back explaining what was actually true.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that some people come up with is pretty amazing. They must hear it from somewhere.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks, everyone. All right, close the meeting at 7:59 PM, under 2 hours
Yay!
by 1 minute.